Hello and welcome. So a few weeks ago, I was talking about where to get your rats from, and I mentioned that I would do a video on where to find a good breeder, and it's finally time to do that. So one thing I will say, there's a big difference between what's considered a good breeder in the UK and what's considered a good breeder in the US. I can't speak for other countries. I can't even speak for like Canada because I'm not there. I can only really speak for the US. And one thing you'll notice is a lot of people don't like how the US does things, which is fair. We mess up a lot. But anyway, let's get into it. So in the UK, signs for a good breeder are started off with, are they part of the NFRS, which is the National Fancy Rat Society? If they're not on that list, if they're not a member of that society, then they're considered a bad breeder, because all decent breeders will be on that list, even though not all breeders on that list are going to be decent. In America, we don't really have that. We have the, what's it called? American Fancy Mouse and Rat Association. A lot of breeders will be on that list, but it's not the same. It's pretty trash, honestly. So that's not a good indication of what's a good breeder and what's not a good breeder. So beyond that, let's start listing things. So one thing is, what does the breeder feed? So a good breeder should probably be feeding a varied diet. So in the UK, if they're not breeding the Sheenamite diet, then they're considered a bad breeder, which is fair. In the US, the Sheenamite diet is just getting started, getting the ball rolling on that, so it's less common, but still, in my opinion, if they're feeding the Sheenamite diet, that's better. There are some options for blocks, like Oxbow is considered one of the best rat blocks out there for the US. And then there's Missouri, which is like an actual lab block. It's like block sized. I have no experience with this. I don't know much about it. Most people consider Oxbow to be the far superior brand. So if they're feeding a block, it should be Oxbow. If they're feeding something like Missouri, they're doing that because it's cheaper. And if they're doing something specifically just because it's cheaper, something that has a direct connection to the health of their pet, just because it's cheaper, you do have to question whether or not they're in it for the right reasons. So in my opinion, one of the breeders I've gone to has like a feeding schedule. They get different food every single day to do that creates a complete diet. It does include lab blocks, but they don't get that every single day. They do like a Sheenamite mix, some fresh food, they have like a specific kind of like mush they feed them. They do wet meals. They do like, again, the Sheenamite mix, and that's good. That's nice varied diet. You want that. Other thing is, how often do they breed? So in the UK, I'm gonna be flipping back and forth between these two guys, I'm sorry. So in the UK, most breeders only breed like once, maybe twice a year, and they only have 2, 3, on the extreme 4 litters at a time. And they do that because they only have a few lines. So in the US, most breeders have a lot more lines. It's not necessarily a bad thing as long as the rats are getting everything that they need, but that is just something to be aware of, is most US breeders have 5, 6 lines sometimes. So a lot of US breeders will breed more frequently because they have more lines to maintain, but you still don't want them to have rats constantly. A good breeder is not going to plan it to where they constantly have baby rats or rats of all ages. There's going to be breaks because they want Am I bothering you? Because you want them to be able to properly socialize the baby rats. You want the baby rats to have same age company. You want them to be old enough to actually breed. So if you're looking at a breeder and they say things like rats of all ages available, or come back soon, we'll have more in a couple of weeks, that kind of stuff, I probably would look at a different breeder. So another thing is, what age do they breed these rats at? A good breeder, by the way, you can ask them all these questions and they will tell you. They will be open and honest with you. If they kind of shuffle questions off to the side or they have vague answers, they're trying to placate you, and you don't want that. So anyway, another is, what age do they breed? So most breeders won't breed under 6 months old, including in America, but some will breed younger, which isn't necessarily healthy for them. They should only also be bred, a female should only be bred a maximum of 3 times. Most reputable breeders will only breed once, maybe twice. So that's something to also keep in mind. After 3 times, it really starts to have a detriment on their health. So if you go to like one of those rehoming sites or a rehoming page or what have you, and someone has baby rats, and it doesn't also have a link to some kind of social media or website that you can scroll through, see how they do things, see how they care for their rats, see a cage ideally, see like multiple like litters that you can like look at, then I wouldn't trust it. Like, what are you hiding? But yeah, they're not a reputable breeder at that point. They're a backyard breeder because they don't have any way for you to examine their care or their past litters or get in contact with them other than that one selling site. So I wouldn't personally go to someone who didn't have another form of contact. So another thing is, as you're talking to these breeders, a good breeder should have a adoption application where you have to go in and fill in all sorts of things like, what are you planning on feeding them, who's your vet, there'll be something in there about how you have to bring the rats back to them if something happens, what kind of cage you have, substrate you use, if you have male or female, like all these questions. And if you're talking to someone who's just like, yeah, I have baby rats, here you go, that's a backyard breeder because they don't care what happens to the rat, they just want your money. So that is a red flag to look out for. Definitely, if they don't have an adoption application and it's not a rehoming situation, I'd be very hesitant to adopt from them. So another factor is, how old do they home the rats out? So in America, it's still considered okay to do 6 to 8 weeks. In the UK, most people say 8 to sometimes even 12 weeks is better. So the reason you don't want a rat under 6 weeks is because they need to stay with their mom. They need to stay with their cage mates. They need to stay in their home because the longer they can stay with their mom and their litter mates and all that kind of stuff, the more confident and bold they'll be, and they get a lot of the socialization they need. And then they go to you and they're already used to people, they're used to household sounds, they're used to other rats, they know how to interact with adult rats, and they're going to be calmer and better for it. So in America, that's 6 to 8 weeks. In the UK, it's like 8 to 12 weeks. So another thing is, a good breeder will always home out in pairs or trios or sometimes more. Like, it depends on what you want. Like, if you have like a single story critter nation, you just want 4 immediately, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. But if you just wanted 4 immediately, then that's fine. But if they say that, if they have even a single rat option without some caveat of like, must be like extreme circumstances or something, even then, honestly, it's a little iffy. But like, if they're willing to home out a single rat, a single baby rat especially, I'd be hesitant. Like, I just straight up want to go to them. Because then again, they're in it for the profit. They don't have a lot of knowledge. They're a backyard breeder. So baby rats need same age company in order to properly develop socially. And if they don't have that, then a lot of times they are very difficult with other rats. They can be very hard to intro. They're very like jumpy. If you think about it for a second, it's just like, this rat is being taken away from their mother, their siblings, everything they've ever known, and being brought to a house where they know nothing, put in a cage that doesn't smell like them, might smell like other rats, might smell like predators. They don't know you. You're just this big old person they have never seen before. And it can be comforting to have a sibling there that they do know, that they've bonded with, because then they're not alone. So there's a lot of reasons to get same age company. If your breeder is willing to give you a rat without same age company, they're in it for the profit. They do not care about the rat's welfare. This is this is specifically an American thing. So in America, a lot of breeders do something called culling, or hard culling if you prefer. And this is where if a litter of rats or the mom is displaying behaviors they don't like, they euthanize the entire litter. There's a lot of arguments about it. Like, it's pretty easy to find out if a breeder culls or not. They're usually very proud about it. They are very open and very proud about it. But the thought process behind it is, like, if the mom shows maternal aggression over her litter, then the thought process is the babies are more likely to be aggressive in the future. So instead of, taking that chance and dealing with the fact that sometimes you have a rat that needs to be spayed or neutered, the breeder will just kill all the babies. Which is, personally, I find it abhorrent. A lot of people don't mind it. I think it's disgusting, and I don't support those kinds of breeders. I will not go to a breeder that culls. I find a lot of times they don't even really give the rats a chance. It's like, I've seen it where a litter of rats was mildly skittish, and they just culled all of them because there was a chance in the future they might bite. As someone who has a lot of rescues, and has had a lot of rescues, I don't appreciate that. I've had rescues that were extremely skittish. I have 3 girls in here right now that all had to be spayed for hormonal aggression, and one in here who had to be spayed for hormonal aggression, and in my opinion, their lives are worth it, and therefore, culling isn't worth it. It doesn't make sense to me. And furthermore, again, it's like, well, rat bites can be extremely painful. They can do a lot of damage. You can get nerve damage, you could get severe, you can get mobility issues. Rat bites are serious. But in the same vein, so are cat bites. Cats have so much bacteria in their mouth and claws that a cat bite can and does send people to the hospital pretty frequently. But no one says to kill a kitten because the kitten's scratching and biting, because people have more value for a kitten's life than a rat's life. And in another vein, snakes, for example, they don't see people. To snakes, people are warm trees. Snakes bite a lot, and they can also do a lot of damage, but people have more value over a snake life than a rat life, so the snakes get to live, but the rats don't. It doesn't make sense. If you're going to breed, accept the responsibility of having litters sometimes that might need a little extra TLC. This point is kind of in the same vein. A lot of these people who don't want to deal with more difficult litters will just sell off the difficult rats as feeder rats. A reputable breeder would never do this. And lastly, this is one of those big differences between the UK and the US, which is pricing. So in the UK, it's considered a red flag if a breeder has rare varieties priced higher than normal varieties, because all the rats cost the same amount of money to take care of, so it doesn't make sense. I have never, ever seen a US breeder that prices all the rats the same. Every single one of them will put a higher price on more interesting rats. Like, for example, silver manes will sometimes go for more, typically not like Rexes. Most breeders don't consider Rex interesting enough, or Dumbos interesting enough to have a higher price. So it's hard to tell when this is a red flag and when it isn't if you're new to looking at US breeders. My suggestion would be, if it's... Sorry, Cloud's sleeping funny over there. I don't know what she's doing. Anyway, so if it's something like Dumbo or Rex and they're priced an insanely high amount, red flag. If it's something like Silvermane, less of a red flag. You would just have to look at all of the information the breeder has given you and base it off that, whether or not it's a red flag or not, because it's just one of those differences. The US does it, the UK doesn't. So one of the other differences you might see some people saying, if you're looking into how to find a good breeder, you're looking at a lot of UK information, one of the things you'll come across often is that UK breeders will select your rats for you, meaning that they, based on what you want in a rat, will pick out the babies and you don't get to choose. I've never come across that in the US. I'm sure there are some US breeders that do that. I haven't come across it. In my experience, I don't know how much that matters, because baby rats are going to change based on how you raise them. And then again, there's like the hormones around 6 months old that really can change their personality, and then you have to get them spayed or neutered, and they go back to how they were. But I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I don't necessarily think it's a red flag if you get to select your babies from a breeder. Another major difference you'll see between UK and US if you're looking at UK information. In the UK, a breeder is immediately flagged as a backyard breeder if they have one of the problematic varieties. Problematic varieties being hairless, black-eyed white, Harley, what's that one called? Marble / spotted tabby, and Manx. And there's also another one called like dominant white spotted or something like that. All of these varieties have problems endemic with their variety, and UK breeders straight up will not breed them, and it's considered a red flag if they do breed them. US breeders. I've never come across a US breeder that doesn't breed at least one of them. The most common ones I see are Harley, hairless, like most people breed hairless, but it's hairless Harley, and then I actually see a lot of marbled / spotted tabby. So, the issues with that is like hairless have a lot of issues. They have trouble lactating, they have eye issues, they have skin issues, they have respiratory issues, they have kidney issues. Manx have kidney issues and spinal issues, and they're often born deformed. Harley have skin issues because they can't digest protein properly. The one I can't remember, it's like DWS or something. They often have megacolon. Marbles have teeth issues like severe malocclusion, which often results in euthanasia or starving to death if you don't believe in euthanasia for some reason. And then black-eyed whites often have epilepsy. So in the US, I've never seen a breeder that won't breed at least one of these. In the UK, I haven't seen a breeder that would breed any of these, to be perfectly honest. Alright, so finally, let's talk about my personal red flags for US breeders. Because based on everything I've just said, you're going to have to decide, because the US breeders and UK breeders are vastly different. You're going to have to decide what your personal red flags are and what you are and are not willing to put up with, essentially. So, my red flags is I won't go to a breeder that homes them out too young. If it's not 6 to 8 weeks, then I won't go to them. Preferably closer to 8 weeks. If they don't have a website or social media where I can monitor how they take care of their rats, I won't go to them, because I like to pay attention to breeders for a while, because sometimes they can seem really good and then it turns out they're not, and you can't do that if they don't have any way of showing how they care for their rats. I won't go to a breeder that culls or sells feeder rats. Another red flag for me is if they say that they have rats of all ages. That's immediate backyard breeder. I don't know. If they always have babies, another sign of a backyard breeder. And I don't trust. So this one is something that pops up a lot in US rat groups, where someone says they got a rat from someone who had a lifelong health and temperament guarantee. That's a red flag. Some breeders might have a temporary health guarantee, like both the breeders I have one for a month, I think. Some I've seen go up to 6 months. Temperament guarantee is a lot harder because, again, males get those surge of hormones. You can't really guarantee that that's not going to affect them. But if it says lifelong, they're trying to sell you a rat. They don't actually care about you or your pet. For me, another thing is pricing, not necessarily different prices for different varieties, but if the price is outrageous, if it's $100 for a single rat, that's a little bit of a red flag for me. $100 for a single rat seems egregious to me. You're trying to make a lot of money off of a variety you have deemed special, as opposed to trying to find that particular rat an excellent home. You're basing it off who can pay you and not who can take care of the rat. So this one is, I've never seen anyone else talk about this. This is a personal one for me, but if the breeder doesn't keep the moms after they're done breeding for them, I personally won't go to that breeder. A lot of breeders, when they start running out of space, will rehome the moms to just anyone. If they're rehoming them to someone they know, I have less of an issue with it. But the thing is, the reason you should keep a lot of rats from a certain line is to monitor their temperament and health as they age. As I've mentioned before, my friends and I kept an entire litter. Not to mention, my friend Kendra and I often have rats that are related to each other, and currently Cappy and I have wild rats that are related to each other. And it's really easy to see that matters. Like, certain rats have had pituitary tumors. Like, I had a rat named Willow, and my friend had her sister Rivia, and it was like an echo. Everything that happened to Rivia happened to Willow like a couple of months later. And all the Novas had the same issues, and it's just very clear. And you can't breed for better health if you don't know what you're trying to breed out. So in my opinion, if a breeder doesn't keep the parents for their whole life, or at least keep a close tab on the parents for the whole life, they can't properly breed that line, and it's a red flag for me. I also, food, what they feed them can be a red flag. I've seen some people who will rant and rave about the Shunamite diet, saying it's terrible because it's not blocks. I don't trust those people. They aren't educated enough to be breeding rats. I've also seen people say that they feed them cat food, or just cat food. Like the Weather Girls, they were a rehoming situation, but I'll still use them as an example. The person I got them from was just feeding them puppy kibble, which is not a complete diet and not good for them. So the food does matter. And finally for me, the last red flag I'll talk about is what bedding they're on. If they're on fleece, Carefresh, that kind of stuff, it is a red flag for me, because it makes me wonder how much research they've done, what's their reasoning for using that substrate. Because if their reasoning is that they don't know better, I don't want to adopt from them, obviously. If they have a reason, it's one of those iffy red flags that you'd have to talk to the breeder about and have to decide your own personal preference. I'm fine with wood shavings, hemp, any kind of loose substrate that's not paper-based is fine in my opinion. I just really don't trust fleece, because how can the mom properly build a nest? And I don't really trust paper because it's very dusty and the babies are just living in that dust. So, all right. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.